As a kid growing up in the ghetto, one of the things I wanted the most was not money. It was fame. I wanted to be known. I wanted people to say, "Hey, there goes OJ." That wish came true for Mr. Orenthal James Simpson, one of the greatest American athletes that ever lived, and a man who was the accused in one of the grisliest and most controversial murder cases ever to paint TV screens all around the world. Was he guilty? Did he get away with murder? Was he an egomaniac, harboring a dangerous personality disorder? Or was he the friendly, jovial giant he came across as in the public eye? The victim of a conspiracy, not the type of guy who would almost hack off the head of the one he professed to love. Before we get into that, some of you might not be familiar with this once American idol, sports icon, and man that divided America. So, let's introduce you to him. He's best known as O.J. Simpson, but to on the wrong side of town, to an adoring mother and a drag queen father. O.J. got into trouble as a kid and also suffered from physical disabilities due to having had rickets. But what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And this rather large boy started to focus his efforts on sports. This is a crime story, not a sports bio. So to cut a long story short, we can say that O.J. soon became an excellent American football player. So good in fact, that he became one of the best college football players in history. His forte was running, dodging, crashing through and gliding by players as if they were cardboard cutouts. He was destined for a very successful pro career that got off to a rocky start. But then O.J. the Invincible became the first pro player to rush more than 2,000 yards in a season. The year was 1973, and O.J. was just 26. He was a sensation, and it can't be understated just how much he became a hero not only to the African American community, but to all athletes and armchair aficionados sports. Other players would breach 2,000 yards in the future, but only O.J. did it in a 14-game season. The others did it in 16 games. His stardom put his face on TV for more than just sports, with perhaps his lift off to celebrity status being a Hertz car rental commercial featuring him running through an airport. The other cast of characters would smile and watch him run by, saying, "Go O.J." He was the American dream come true, the black guy from the wrong side of the tracks, showing everyone that anyone could make it in America. Critics have since said he was used in a way to obfuscate the pervasive racism in America at the time, and his rags to riches tale was far from accessible to most poor black Americans. But others hailed his role model status as a veritable US success story. O.J. soon became embedded in a predominantly white upper-class society. In interviews, some of his former friends have said this was problematic, that O.J. abandoned his roots, that he was merely a token black dude for people who cared little about him. O.J. said he never thought about color or race, and just did what he did. He settled down and got married, and with his first wife had 3 children. One of those would die young from drowning. At the same time, O.J. was acting in Hollywood blockbusters. His dreams had come true. People really were saying, "Hey, there goes O.J." We must say at this point his celebrity didn't encircle the globe, as American football wasn't very popular outside of the US. But give him a few years, and O.J. would be a household name, from Adelaide to Aberdeen, for all the wrong reasons. In 1979, he met an 18-year-old girl called Nicole Brown, who was a waitress in a private Beverly Hills club called Daisy. He told one of his friends that one day he would marry this incredibly beautiful girl. And the unstoppable O.J. did just that, after he had divorced his first wife. The year was 1985, when O.J. married Brown, and the two would have 2 children of their own shortly after the marriage. This was a rocky relationship, and in interviews Brown's friends have come forward a number of times to say he was a man with a violent temper. In fact, in 1989, O.J. pleaded no contest to spousal abuse. The two later divorced in 1992. You can actually listen to a recording of Brown calling the police at one point, saying she was scared he was going to beat her badly. The domestic violence that O.J. perpetrated had not been denied, not even by most of his fans. But was the deuce capable of brutally murdering people? Let's now take you to the crime scene. The night of the crime was June 12, 1994. We might never know exactly what happened on that night, but Brown and her friend, Ron Goldman, were found dead at Brown's townhouse in Brentwood, Los Angeles. If you have seen the documentaries about this crime, you might have seen the crime scene photos. Brown had been hit on the head with a blunt object, slashed multiple times and stabbed. It was likely she was dead when the murderer slit her throat so viciously, he or she almost decapitated her. Goldman, it seems, had struggled with the murderer for some time, but having run into a place surrounded by bars, he had no way out. He was slashed and stabbed multiple times, too. It seems one of his major arteries in his leg was cut, and he lost a lot of blood quickly. But as one commentator said, the murderer again went into overkill. Goldman was stabbed in the neck at almost the same place multiple times. No one disagreed. Whoever had done this had done so fueled by a monstrous rage. It said that Goldman had been at Brown's house as he was delivering some lost glasses. He had put those in an envelope. Both the glasses and the envelope were later found at the crime scene. We'll later hear in court that a loud bang was heard at our house in the evening. Simpson had never had a solid alibi, but has stated that he was home at the time of the murders, approximately 10:15 p.m. But we will come to that later. The first officers on the scene witnessed the carnage, noticing a bloody glove also just lying around. One detective, Mark Furman, then went around to O.J.'s house, fearing he might also be one of the victims, and if not, to tell O.J. what happened at his former wife's house. O.J.'s house and Brown's place were only a matter of minutes away by car, and it's well known to police about O.J. and Brown's marriage and divorce. At O.J.'s house another bloody glove was found, and it matched the glove found at Brown's house. More blood was seen eating from Simpson's parked car. It was later discovered that victim's blood was on both gloves, which gave police probable cause to arrest Simpson. The thing was, Simpson had flown to Chicago on the night of the murders. He had also been taken to the airport by a Mr. Park in his limousine. It's thought that this happened sometime after the murders probably happened. Mr. Park would testify that when he was to pick Simpson up, his white Ford Bronco was not parked in the street. Simpson seemed to be out, and so he drove around waiting. Mr. Park would testify that it wasn't until 10:56 p.m. that he would see a large, strong-looking African-American man walk into Simpson's house. He went to the door, and O.J. finally appeared, chance to talk to him. After being told about the murders, Simpson flies back to L.A. Police now have a search warrant for Simpson's house, and more blood is found. When O.J. gets home, he's handcuffed and questioned for over 3 hours. The line of questioning has since been criticized. Cops go easy on him. A few days later, he then goes to the funeral of his ex-wife, and a day after that, he's charged with 2 counts of murder. He's asked to surrender, but he doesn't give himself up. Instead, what happens is one of the biggest media moments of the late 20th century, as Simpson is followed by helicopters and a stream of police cars down the highway. It's what's called a media circus. It has America and most of the world glued to their TV screens. It's reported that he has a gun, and he might kill himself. People all over America believe this has been a setup. They shout, "Go O.J." The cars following make it look more like a president's motorcade than a police chase. This will become one of the most iconic moments in news history. Massive crowds are waiting on highway benches, standing in the streets holding signs that read, "Free O.J." They're chanting, "O.J., O.J., O.J." It's as if the juice is back on the field on one of his epic runs and the world doesn't want him to stop. His car finally arrives at his house. SWAT teams are out. People are running around. Helicopters overhead. It's chaos. OJ waits in his car. His gun is said to be close to his chin. If he steps out with a gun in his hand, he will most likely be shot. He doesn't want to do that, and is talked out of the car. The negotiator years later will say that while in OJ's house he noticed only pictures, paintings, photos of the star, none of anyone else, not even the family, and so to lure him out of the car he appealed to OJ's ego, his greatness. It worked. People interviewed in the streets are saying it's conspiracy, more oppression and human rights abuses by a police force known to be corrupt, sometimes racist, sometimes unnecessarily violent. The case of Rodney King still stings among the African American community, who for good reason have doubts about the ethics of the LAPD. The police are well aware of the tension and the destruction of the LA riots of '92. They move as if tenterhooks. Other men may have perhaps been treated with less trepidation. A court date is made. The prosecutors later said to the media, "I don't think I had ever seen so much evidence in one case. It didn't look cut and dried." But to OJ's fans, something was rotten in the state of California. If anyone could find where that stink was coming from, it was the civil rights lawyer, John Cochran. He was a hero to many people in the African American community. Already some people had forgotten about the two hacked bodies and were concentrating their emotions on a bevy of other top lawyers. "Boy, I was set up," OJ would soon say, and his words echo throughout black communities over the USA. Surveys showed that only 10% of African Americans issue. OJ even said to his lawyer, joking, "If this jury says I did, I issue." OJ even said to his lawyer, joking, "If this jury says I did it, maybe I did do it." It wasn't cheap, though, the trial. It said OJ would make around $3 million just by signing items with autographs as he sat in jail. He was still adored by many, regardless of what he might have done. It was the trial of the century, and within a trial was another kind of trial. That's because the policeman that found the glove at OJ's house would be found to have said some very racist things in the past. On top of that, it was also found with good evidence that he had bragged about police brutality. Fail for the LAPD. The glove must have been planted by him, shouted OJ fans. It's just another case of police racism. There was blood of the victims all over the place, from Oates' house to his car. It was open and shut in terms of DNA evidence. But those crafty lawyers proved that the crime scene had been contaminated, and that possibly there had been a setup. They weren't trying to prove that the cops had something against OJ, only that the possibility they had planted evidence for an easier arrest. Even though OJ had been cut himself that night and his blood was mixed with the victims, the lawyers managed to convince a jury that something was wrong, and indeed the police had mishandled evidence. We might also say that DNA evidence was kind of new to everyone, not just the jury. Nowadays, we can read things such as this. It is reported that the DNA evidence showed that the chance that some of the blood found near the bodies came from anyone but Simpson was 1 in 170 million. The chance that the blood found on Simpson's sock could be from someone other than Nicole Brown was 1 in 21 billion. But back then the jurors didn't trust DNA. They also believed the defense, and that there had been some kind of setup and OJ's blood had been taken and just thrown everywhere, from the crime scene to his car, to his house, to his clothes. The gloves were tried on in court, and famously OJ ate his blood, and the victims were on those gloves. But it didn't matter. As Cochran told the jury, if the glove doesn't fit, acquit. Hair from an African American was also found at the scene, and on Ron Goldman's shirt, while shoes matching Simpson's size had made footprints in the blood. After the trial, evidence would be found of Simpson owning the exact shoes that were worn by the killer, but it was too late then. The sock we just mentioned was also found at Simpson's home, and that too had blood of the victim's arm. But as we said, Some finagling by very clever lawyers persuaded the jury that the cops had colluded and set O.J. up, but that there was a chance that evidence had been mishandled. Photos of Brown's bruised face was shown to the jury. From a time Simpson had beat her in the past and been arrested, it didn't matter. There was a racist cop involved with that evidence, and that meant something. LAPD criminalists had done a poor job, and that meant something, too. Cochran rated a summation fitting of a wartime speech, and even though it was completely over the top by many people's standards, it meant something as well. So even with so much evidence, the case of the prosecution was doomed, and as one of the former jurors said in a documentary interview, she was never going to find him guilty. This was payback for Rodney King. She said 90% of the other juries thought the same. Although in the same documentary another former juror said she had no bones about King related to this case. But the prosecution had pretty much failed and let a guilty man go free. Lots of evidence was not presented by the defense, such as Brown calling a woman shelter days before her death, saying she feared her ex-husband was stalking her, or the fact that a shop owner had said Simpson had bought a 15-inch knife from him that might have matched the kind of knife in the murders. The prosecution couldn't use that because the man who sold it to Simpson sold his story to the media. Police did search for a knife but couldn't find one. The media also reports that a knife was found during the demolition of Simpson's house some years later, but it was kept as a memento by an LAPD officer. Another person said she saw Simpson's Ford Bronco driving wildly that night, but she also sold that story to the media, and so the prosecution couldn't use her testimony. Civil rights activists called it a street that justice had been served. What most people failed to shout it from the streets, that justice had been served. What most people failed to realize is that O.J. had admitted that he would have lost without doubt had he not have had this expensive team of lawyers. In terms of human rights, was this justice not justice bought with money? Did the color of the money hold more sway than the color of the skin? No one seemed to ask. Black, white, or brown. If you are poor, you are having a harder time in court than if you are rich. Had justice really prevailed? It was hard to call it a victory, and in this case might have meant to people being slaughtered like cattle by a man who thought he was untouchable. Simpson did lose a civil case to Ron Goldman's family, and a jury found O.J. guilty of causing wrongful death. This meant that Simpson was ordered in total to pay both families of the deceased $33.5 million in compensatory and punitive damages. But how much they got was nothing close to that. They hounded Simpson 4 years, or at least the Goldmans did, but O.J. had a way of protecting what little money he had left. O.J. did end up going to prison for a few years of acting like a gangster and making music videos and some TV shows. He was apparently trying to get some of his memorabilia back, but a failed hotel heist in Las Vegas got him 9 years. He was released in 2017, and it said he now lives a quiet life as a retiree somewhere in Las Vegas. Apparently, he still loves golf, but we might imagine his juice glass these days is half empty. His former manager is now reportedly making a new documentary. He has stated that Simpson did the murders, events on the night of the murders. What's strange is that Simpson basically retraces the steps of himself that night, and how he hypothetically commits the murders. He says this in a third person, such as, he took the Bronco to her home with his friend, brought a knife, and put on a hat and gloves for dramatic effect. He even added, it was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. Simpson then says Goldman tried some karate move with him, and he asked if he thought he could kick his backside. He said he then blacked out, but came around and there was stuff all around him. He was talking about blood. If you watch this, you might just wonder what the heck you have just seen. The video was not published for many years because it was such a sensitive case, and there could be legal issues. So the tapes were reportedly only recently found. So, after hearing all this, Are you in the Go OJ camp? Or do you think he was guilty? So now OJ is dead, what do you think about him, the investigation, his diehard Vance? Tell us in the comments. Also, be sure to check out our other video. Thanks for watching. And as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.